With the stroke of a pen, President Donald Trump whitewashed history on his first day in office. In his zeal to bend the nation to his worldview, he issued pardons and commutations to all those who committed violent and non-violent crimes on January the 6th, 2021. This included those convicted of assaulting police officers and those convicted of seditious conspiracy. The grant of clemency extends to roughly 1,600 people. President Trump also directed the Justice Department to, quote, dismiss all pending indictments that remained against people. This move unwound the largest single criminal inquiry in the history of the Justice Department.
As the news trickled out, those freed erupted with joy. The mother of Enrique Tarrio, the former chairman of the Proud Boys who was convicted of seditious conspiracy, had this to say on X. My son is being released. Oh my God, Lord, thank you. Tarrio is free. Tarrio was sentenced to 22 years. He was released from a prison in Louisiana and is expected to be home in Miami by tomorrow.
Free the boys! 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 Free our boys! Free our boys! Free our boys!
In a show of support for President Trump, Proud Boys boldly took to the streets of the nation's capital on Monday. Journalist Tess Owen, who has covered the Proud Boys and other right-wing organisations since the Unite the Right rally in 2017, had this to say, quote, cannot stress how significant this is. DC has been seen as a no-go zone by the far right since J6, particularly the Proud Boys. Meanwhile, Philip Anderson, who describes himself as a January the 6th survivor and routinely refers to the people imprisoned as hostages, had this to say on X. Big O has been released from prison and David Summerall and I just picked him up after waiting for hours. Big O is the January the 6th hero who put his feet up on Pelosi's desk.
It was not always clear that President Trump would grant such sweeping clemency. As recently as this weekend, Vice President-elect had this to say on Fox. Trump, as the Vice President-elect, had this to say on Fox News.
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
That was remarks from Vice President J.D. Vance, not from Donald Trump, obviously.
Well, indeed. So we have very different opinions on this. I think it is a shameful thing to have pardoned these people and commuted the sentences of others. I think they participated in an attempt to overthrow an election. I think that many of them were convicted of violent offences. I find it bizarre that the Republican Party, which positions itself as the party of law and order, is willing to go along with pardons for people who assaulted police officers, often in extremely appalling ways. And, I think that the current President of the United States is pardoning people who sought to overturn an election and used force to do so, and he's pardoning them because they support him.
I do disagree. Now, I would not have done it this way for certain. I would have done it case by case along the lines of what J.D. Vance said, looking at are there cases where the sentences are egregious. I would point out that 2/3 of the people arrested were charged with nonviolent misdemeanors, such as entering or remaining in restricted building or grounds, parading, demonstrating, picketing in a Capitol building, those kinds of things. Now, that is also fine to charge, and I don't. I would not have pardoned all of them because I think you should have been charged for doing that. But the question becomes, well, how long is the sentence? And in particularly in Enrique Tarrio's case, he got a sentence of 20 years, 22 years, something like that, 20 years, because they charged him with seditious conspiracy and participation in a terrorist event. The prosecutors at the trial said, this was a prosecutor said, it was no different than if they had blown up a building. And the defense said, well, that's ludicrous. And the judge said, that is kind of ludicrous. The prosecutors have sought twice as many years, 40 years. And the judge said, well, it's not terrorism. Maybe it's half terrorism. Okay, how about 20 years? That just did not strike me as overly scientific. Again, Tarrio was not there on January 6th. He didn't enter any restricted building. So if that's the kind of attitude they were going to take, that these people are terrorists or were involved in planning a terrorist event on the scale of 9/11, then yes, I do think they should be. I mean, I think that jail time, some amount of jail time might have been appropriate, but I don't think 20 years was appropriate. So I am fine to have them released on the basis of the government overcharging them and considering them terrorists.
First of all, in relation to Enrique Tarrio, the reason he wasn't present, which I assume you know, is that he had been arrested on January the 4th for possession of a large magazine of ammunition, and at the time was under scrutiny by law enforcement because of his involvement with the Proud Boys and the fact that those people were subsequently proven to have been planning various acts pertaining to January the 6th.
He had also multiple times served as a law enforcement asset. He was informing on law enforcement about the activities of the Proud Boys. He had gone back and forth between the... Look, he's a reprehensible and crazy individual. I'm not making excuses for him.
He was in touch with people who were calling for revolution, who were talking about seizing crucial buildings, and who were worried at one point that the cops might have spotted their, quote, boots on the ground plan before the attack took place. When the attack did take place, Enrique Tarrio was on social media saying, "I'm enjoying the show, do what must be done, don't effing leave, and proud of my boys and my country," while people were storming the Capitol, attacking law enforcement officers, trying to overthrow an election, trying to keep the loser of an election in power, trying to thwart the democratic will of the people of the United States, etc. It is a charge of seditious conspiracy on which his peers, his citizens, found him guilty. That is an extremely serious charge, and it is a shameful thing for him to be pardoned.
Yeah, well, we we see it very differently. I mean, what am I supposed to say? I think the group of...
Well, you could say maybe it's a bad idea to pardon Enrique Tarrio, for example.
I don't. I think if they had charged him with something less, then I would say fine. Or I would have rather commuted his sentence rather than pardoned him. Commutation is to say that the sentence is wrong, but there was still a crime there. I would have commuted these people rather than pardoned them. But no, I don't think... Again, when you're describing his criminal plot, his mastermind terrorist, this was a plot to kick over people's desks in the Capitol building.
Robby,
it was not a plot.
Why were they kicking people's desks over? It wasn't misbehaving in school. It was an attempt to thwart the certification of an election and thus keep the loser of that election in power. That's why they were there.
There's not a scepter of governance that when you possess it, you stop the next person taking over. The building is a psychological representation. It's not literally who controls the Capitol. I mean, they're not a militia army. They're not a organized fighting force. They're not led by like some counter faction within the military. They had no means. What they have is boastful, deranged, conspiratorial, internet posting type stuff, which is not
see
criminal.
What happened on January the 6th? You
I
were
was
there, right?
Yeah, I saw.
And posting, come on. It's invading the Capitol with violence in many cases to overturn an election.
With violence in about a third of the cases. Most
who are now either pardoned or commuted, all of them.
I would not have pardoned them, although even though,
including 170 who pleaded guilty to assaulting law enforcement.
The shaman guy, the guy with the horns.
Yes.
He engaged in no violence. He was in prison for 3 years, including solitary confinement for a significant chunk of that time. Maybe we just have a very different view of what the criminal justice system is to do. Maybe you are more of a tough on crime person than I am, and you think disorder and lawlessness should always be punished with decades and decades in prison.
I think
the point of the criminal justice system is to keep us safe from violent criminal people.
Destroy the basics of the democratic process should be punished.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't think it was an attempt to destroy the basics of the democratic process. I think it was a riot, it was a protest that got out of hand, turned into a riot, and they entered into a public building and
what was it a protest
wrecked
about?
it. It was a protest about the election results.
Right, which were legitimate.
Their view, their attitude of the election is immaterial. They have the right to be. It's a speech thing. Here's what I think. I support Trump. We won is a speech thing.
The United States Capitol or assault law enforcement officers. Those aren't speech things.
The crime was trespassing. The crime was rioting. The crime was not overthrowing an election, because that was not going to happen and didn't happen, and Biden took over, and no amount of them being in the building was going to stop it. What was going to stop it was, the fake elector scheme or the legal challenges or all of that stuff. The literal thing on the day, I know it was embarrassing and it was bad, but that was not going to result in the election, in Biden taking office. It wasn't. Occupying the building was not going. It's not who holds the building. It's not a board game. It's not when I have Park Place, I win.
The building was to stop the certification of the election result. That is why Mike Pence was in threat of being hanged, because they didn't want him to certify the legitimate winner of that election, who was Joe Biden.
They didn't want him to, but it is not a crime for them to not want him to.
It's
not a crime
to stop him by force. This is just a.
Well, we disagree. And we'll have to leave it there. Tell us what you think. More Rising right after this.